Imagine finally finding a place to live in ancient Rome. You climb several flights of creaking wooden stairs, squeeze through a narrow hallway, and unlock the door to what you hope will be home. But the moment you step inside, you hear something unsettling. A crack echoes from somewhere deep in the building. The floor shifts ever so slightly beneath your feet. Nobody around you seems concerned. In fact, they barely notice. Because in ancient Rome, apartment buildings collapsed so often that many residents simply accepted the risk as part of everyday life. The city of Rome was packed with people. By some estimates, more than 1 million residents crowded into a space far smaller than a modern city of similar population. Land inside the city was expensive, and wealthy investors saw an opportunity. Instead of building comfortable homes, they built towering apartment blocks known as insulae. These structures stretched upward to maximize profits. The more floors a landlord could add, the more rent he could collect. Safety often came second. From the street, some insulae looked impressive. Their facades were decorated with plaster, painted walls, and rows of windows. To a newcomer, they might appear like thriving urban residences, but appearances could be deceiving. Behind the decorative exterior was often a hurriedly constructed framework of wood, brick, and cheap materials. Builders were under pressure to finish quickly and keep costs low. Hidden weaknesses were common, and residents rarely knew how fragile their homes truly were. The lower floors were usually occupied by shops and wealthier tenants. These residents enjoyed easier access to the street and slightly sturdier construction. The higher you climbed, however, the worse conditions became. Poor families often lived on the uppermost levels, where rooms were smaller, hotter, and more dangerous. Every additional flight of stairs carried you farther from safety. If disaster struck, those at the top had the least chance of escaping. Picture a family of 5 sharing a single cramped room beneath a sloping roof. Their possessions are stacked against the wall to save space. A small cooking area sits near the corner. There is barely enough room to stretch out while sleeping. During the day, the room feels crowded. At night, it becomes suffocating, yet this was home for countless Romans. Privacy was almost non-existent. Every sound, every argument, every cough passed through the thin wall. The constant noise never stopped. Merchants shouted in the streets below. Wagons rattled over stone roads. Neighbors argued through the night. Children cried. Dogs barked. Metalworkers hammered away nearby. Even after sunset, Rome remained restless. Residents of apartment buildings learned to sleep through chaos because they had little choice. Silence was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. For everyone else, noise became a permanent companion. Then there was the smell. Modern apartments have plumbing, ventilation, and waste collection systems. Roman apartment dwellers had none of these comforts. Garbage was often tossed into nearby streets. Chamber pots were emptied through windows. Animals wandered among piles of refuse. On hot summer days, foul odors drifted upward through every floor of the building. Residents became accustomed to smells that would shock most people today. Despite the dangers, landlords continued building higher and higher structures. Some apartment blocks reportedly rose 6 or 7 stories above the crowded streets. The temptation was obvious. More floors meant more tenants and more income, yet each additional level increased the strain on the building. Cracks spread through wall, support beams weakened, foundations struggled under the weight. Residents might notice signs of trouble, but moving elsewhere was rarely an option. One evening, a tenant hears a loud snap from somewhere below. Conversations stop. People exchange nervous glances. Dust drifts from the ceiling. For a few moments, everyone waits. Then the building remains standing and life continues. This scene played out countless times across Rome. The fear of collapse lingered constantly in the background. People learned to ignore warning signs because worrying about them every day would have made life unbearable. For many Romans, surviving inside an apartment building required a strange kind of optimism. They woke each morning hoping their roof would remain overhead for another day. They trusted walls that creaked, floors that shifted, and staircases that groaned under every step. The dark truth was simple. Before fire, crime, disease, or poverty entered the picture, the building itself was already one of the greatest threats to their survival. And for some families, the worst was still waiting just around the corner. As dangerous as Roman apartment buildings were, there was something even more terrifying than a collapsing wall. Fire. Imagine waking in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke creeping beneath your door. At first, you think someone is cooking. Then you hear shouting from below. The air grows thicker. Somewhere in the darkness, a woman screams. Within seconds, panic spreads through the building. In ancient Rome, a small flame could transform an entire neighborhood into an inferno before sunrise. The danger began inside the apartments themselves. Most poor families had no separate kitchen. Cooking happened in the same cramped room where people slept, ate, and stored their belongings. Small braziers filled with hot coals provided heat and allowed meals to be prepared. These fires were used every day. A single spark landing on dry wood, cloth, or straw could ignite disaster. Residents lived surrounded by fuel without fully realizing how vulnerable they were. The upper floors were especially hazardous. Builders often used large amounts of timber because it was cheaper and lighter than stone. Wooden floors connected to wooden beams. Wooden walls supported wooden roofs. Over time, everything dried out under the Mediterranean sun. Entire sections of a building could become as flammable as kindling. Once flames found a way inside, they raced upward with frightening speed, turning homes into giant torches hanging above the street. One careless moment could destroy hundreds of lives. A child might knock over a lamp. A tired tenant might fall asleep beside glowing coals. A merchant storing oil below might accidentally ignite his stock. The causes varied, but the outcome was often the same. Fire spread through apartment buildings faster than people could react. By the time residents understood the danger, escape routes were already disappearing behind curtains of smoke. Picture a family living on the 6th floor. The father wakes coughing. Smoke fills the room. He rushes to the door and finds the staircase already burning below. The only path to safety has vanished. His wife gathers the children. Neighbors pound on walls and shout for help. Through the window, flames dance across rooftops nearby. The family faces an impossible choice: stay inside and hope for rescue, or attempt a desperate escape through the darkness. The streets below offered little comfort. Rome's roads were narrow and crowded. Buildings stood close together, sometimes separated by only a few feet. When one structure caught fire, flames could leap easily to the next. Entire blocks became connected by heat and flying embers. Residents fleeing into the streets often found themselves trapped between multiple fires. The city that seemed vibrant during the day became a deadly maze during the night. Although Rome eventually developed firefighting forces, their abilities were limited compared to modern standards. Buckets of water had to be carried by hand. Equipment was basic. Reaching upper floors was difficult. Firefighters frequently arrived only to discover that the blaze had already spread beyond control. Their efforts often focused on preventing further destruction rather than saving the building itself. For many residents, help simply could not arrive fast enough. The psychological toll was enormous. Every tenant knew stories of families who had gone to sleep and never returned. People discussed recent fires in markets, bathhouses, and workshops. News traveled quickly through the city. Entire livelihoods could disappear overnight. A tailor might lose years of work. A merchant could lose all his inventory. A family might emerge alive but homeless, standing in the ashes of everything they own. Some residents tried to prepare for the inevitable. Important possessions were kept near the door. Money was hidden in small pouches that could be grabbed quickly. Parents taught children where to run if smoke appeared, yet preparation only went so far. Fires moved unpredictably. A person could survive one disaster and perish in another. Every night carried uncertainty. Every strange smell could trigger a moment of fear. Perhaps the cruelest part was how ordinary these dangers became. Residents continued cooking, sleeping, and raising families inside structures they knew could burn at any moment. Life demanded it. Rent had to be paid. Work had to continue. Children still needed food, yet behind every routine task lurked a silent threat. Long before dawn broke over the city, countless Romans lay awake listening to distant noises and wondering whether the next fire would start in someone else's apartment or their own. Fire was the nightmare Romans feared at night. Disease was the enemy waiting for them every morning. Imagine opening your apartment door just after sunrise. Warm air drifts through the hallway, but instead of smelling fresh bread or morning dew, you are greeted by the stench of waste. It rises from the streets below and seeps through every crack in the building. Before you even begin your day, the city reminds you that cleanliness is a luxury few apartment dwellers can afford. Most Roman apartment buildings had no private bathrooms for ordinary tenants. Wealthy citizens living in large homes sometimes enjoyed running water and indoor facilities, but poor residents were far less fortunate. If you lived on the upper floors of an insula, every trip to a public latrine required climbing down multiple flights of stairs and crossing busy streets. During the night, many people simply chose not to make the journey. Instead, they relied on chamber pots kept inside their room. As morning arrived, thousands of those chamber pots needed to be emptied. The problem was obvious. Carrying waste down several flights of narrow stairs was inconvenient and unpleasant. Some tenants followed the rules and disposed of it properly. Others took a shortcut. They leaned out their windows and dumped the contents directly into the street below. Anyone walking beneath an apartment building risked being struck by far more than falling debris. The streets themselves became a dumping ground for all kinds of refuse. Rotten food, broken pottery, animal waste, and household garbage accumulated wherever space allowed. Workers attempted to remove some of it, but the sheer volume produced by a city of over 1 million people was overwhelming. During dry weather, dust mixed with filth and drifted into the air. During rainstorms, the streets transformed into foul streams carrying waste through crowded neighborhoods. Now imagine returning home after a long day of work. You climb several floors to your apartment carrying food and supplies. As you enter the building, you notice movement in the shadows. A rat darts across the hallway. Another disappears beneath a loose floorboard. These creatures thrived in Roman city. They found endless sources of food among garbage piles and crowded buildings. For residents, seeing rats was not unusual. It was simply part of urban life. Rats were not the only unwelcome guests. Fleas, lice, and other parasites spread easily through packed apartment buildings. Families slept close together in small rooms. Bedding was reused for years. Clothing was difficult to clean thoroughly. Once pests appeared, eliminating them was nearly impossible. An infestation in one apartment often spread to neighboring units. Entire buildings became ecosystems supporting creatures that fed on human discomfort. Water presented another challenge. Rome was famous for its aqueducts, but access to clean water was not equal for everyone. Wealthy homes often enjoyed better connections, while poor tenants depended on public fountains. Fetching water required time and effort. Residents carried heavy containers through crowded streets and up steep staircases. Because transporting water was exhausting, many families used less than they truly needed. Washing became an occasional necessity rather than a daily habit. During the summer months, conditions grew even worse. Heat intensified every unpleasant smell. Food spoiled faster, water became more precious. Crowded apartments trapped warm air inside their rooms. A family living near the roof might spend sleepless nights sweating beneath low ceilings while insects buzzed through the darkness. Outside, refuse baked beneath the sun. Inside, stale air lingered for hours. The city seemed to breathe discomfort from every direction. Illness spread easily through such conditions. A single sick resident could expose an entire household. Neighbors shared hallways, staircases, fountains, and public facilities. Medical knowledge was limited. People understood that disease existed, but they often misunderstood its causes. Some blamed bad air. Others blamed angry gods or supernatural forces. Meanwhile, infections moved quietly through crowded apartment blocks, affecting rich and poor alike, though the poor suffered most. Yet perhaps the most remarkable fact is that people continued building lives amid all this filth. Children laughed in courtyards. Merchants opened shops each morning. Families celebrated weddings and births. Human beings adapted because they had no alternative. The smells, the pests, the garbage, and the disease became part of the background of daily existence. But hidden beneath these routines was a grim reality. Surviving a Roman apartment was not merely about avoiding collapse or fire. It was also about enduring an environment that constantly threatened your health. For many Romans, the greatest danger was not fire, disease, or even a collapsing building. It was the simple fact that they could not afford to live anywhere else. Imagine standing at your apartment window after another sleepless night. The roof leaks when it rains. The walls are cracked. Rats move through the hallway, yet leaving is not really an option. You need work. Work is in the city, and the city demands rent. No matter how miserable the apartment becomes, poverty keeps you trapped inside. The landlords of Rome understood one thing very well. Demand was endless. New arrivals entered the city every day looking for opportunity. Laborers, craftsmen, merchants, former soldiers, and freed slaves all needed places to live. As long as people were desperate for housing, apartment owners could continue collecting rent. If one tenant left, another would quickly take his place. This imbalance gave landlords enormous power over the lives of ordinary residents. Some landlords rarely set foot inside their own buildings. They viewed apartments as investments rather than homes. Repairs were expensive. Maintenance reduced profits. As a result, problems were often ignored until they became impossible to overlook. A cracked wall remained cracked. A damaged staircase remained damaged. A leaking roof continued leaking. Tenants complained, but many complaints went unanswered. The people collecting rent were often far removed from the daily reality experienced by those living inside. Picture a laborer returning home after a long day carrying a small pouch of coins. His earnings are modest. Food prices have increased. His children need clothing. Yet rent is due. He counts the coins repeatedly, hoping the numbers will somehow change. They never do. Paying the landlord means sacrificing comfort elsewhere. Not paying could mean eviction. This constant calculation consumed the thoughts of countless Roman families struggling to survive from one month to the next. Life on the upper floors reflected a cruel reality. The poorest residents often paid less rent, but they endured the worst conditions. Every trip home required climbing multiple flights of stairs. Carrying water became exhausting. Moving furniture was nearly impossible. Elderly tenants suffered especially. A simple journey to the street and back could feel like a daily challenge. The higher a person lived, the further they were removed from convenience and safety. Winter introduced new hardships. Cold winds slipped through gaps in walls and roofs. Families gathered close together beneath blankets, trying to preserve warmth. Fuel for heating cost money, and money was always scarce. Some residents burned whatever materials they could find. Others simply endured the cold. In cramped apartments, comfort was rarely guaranteed. Every season brought a new set of difficulties, and each required sacrifices from people already living on the edge. Eviction was a constant threat. Imagine hearing a knock at the door. The landlord's representative stands outside. Rent is overdue. There are no excuses left to offer. No hidden savings waiting to be discovered. A family may be forced to gather its possessions and leave within hours. Everything they own must be carried through crowded streets in search of another place to stay. For many Romans, losing an apartment meant losing stability itself. Children growing up in these buildings learned harsh lessons early. They witnessed arguments over money. They saw neighbors disappear after failing to pay rent. They watched parents struggle to provide food while keeping a roof overhead. The apartment building became more than a place to live. It became a daily reminder of social inequality. Wealthy Romans occupied spacious homes with gardens and courtyards. Poor families shared tiny rooms stacked above dangerous streets. And yet, despite everything, life continued. Residents decorated their rooms when they could. Small lamps illuminated evening meals. Friends visited. Families celebrated festivals. Couples dreamed about a better future. Human resilience filled spaces that comfort never reached. Even within buildings threatened by collapse, fire, disease, and poverty, people found moments of happiness. They laughed, shared stories, and created communities among neighbors facing the same hardship. When we imagine ancient Rome, we often picture emperors, gladiators, and magnificent monuments. But most Romans never lived that life. Their reality was far different. They climbed dark staircases to cramped apartments. They worried about fire in the night. They endured foul smells, disease, and constant financial pressure. They lived inside buildings that could collapse without warning. The dark truth about living in a Roman apartment is not simply that it was uncomfortable. It is that millions of people spent their entire lives navigating dangers that modern residents would find almost unimaginable. Yet somehow, day after day, they endured. And in doing so, they revealed a side of ancient Rome far more human and far darker than the marble monuments history usually remembers.